Hey everyone, welcome to this lesson. So in this one, we're going to talk about data type conversions and finally solve this mysterious problem that we've been having in the past couple of lessons. All right, so let's get it started. It's pretty exciting because this is pretty much going to wrap up anything that you need to know about data types and converting and working with them. So again, we talked about different data types in the previous video. We talked about strings, floats, integers, and also Boolean types. Now, one of the things that you want to remember is that you want to essentially have the ability to turn different data types to each other. And one of the, for example, cases that we're going to need to do this is, say, I want to turn this, the result that we're getting, because again, we're receiving input from the user, and I'm going to say, hey, let's get the length of the name, but then we can't put it in the sentence because, well, we can't, right? Because it's an integer. So how do we actually do this? So there are a few functions I want you to get used to or get familiar with. The first one is that how do you actually find out what is the type of a certain data type that we have, or a variable. For example, in this case, we have a variable called char equals length, and the parentheses it has the name. So the first thing I want to do is, let's actually make this a comment, turn this print into comment. So let's see, I want to see what is this in the first place. So the way you do this is that you actually use a thing or a function called type. So you put type and then you put whatever you want in there, which is char in this case. And this is going to give you a result, or essentially give you the data, or what is this exactly, or this name or char that we have here. Obviously, we're going to print it. So the way you print it is that you add a print and open it, put it in the parentheses and close it like that. So let's print this and let's see what do we get. So if I run this, we're going to say, we have our name here. That doesn't matter, but there you go. So we get this. It says class integer. So this is telling us that this data that we have here, this is an integer. All right, so we got that. So keep that in mind. The type function is going to allow you to just simply find the type of the data that you have for that certain, either if it's a string, for example, let's make this string. How about this? Okay, there we go. Print and print. Obviously now it's going to give us, let's put our name. There you go. See, it's going to give us string. So now we know how to get the data type. So how do we actually change this? The way you actually change the data type is actually pretty simple. And obviously you need to make sure that it does make sense to change a data type in the first place. All right. So keep that in mind, guys. That's very, very important. For example, let's actually list our data types, right? So we got a string, or string, there we go. We got float, and we got integer. All right. So a string is essentially, hello world, right? And the float is, let's say, 3 and 14, right? That's, a float. An integer is essentially, a number like 25 or something. Let's put this out of parentheses, or out of quotation marks. There you go. So these are the data types, right? So what do we need to do is, remember, whatever when you convert these, even a Boolean, right? That's a Boolean. So that's equals, for example, true or something like that, or false, either one of those. And one of the things you want to remember, that when you convert these to each other, you want to remember that it needs to actually make sense. For example, I cannot convert a float into an integer when we have these decimal points, right? So that's very, very important to remember. It doesn't make sense. You got to actually fix that before you actually turn it to an integer or into another data type. So that's very important. Obviously, you can turn these integer and float into a string, because it just turns it into a string, really. And also you can turn a string into a Boolean type if that's what you want to do. But again, keep that in mind. There are some limitations in this. All right. So with that being said, and we'll talk about the limitations later on. All right. So with that being said, let's actually go ahead and do this. So the way you do this is that you actually start with a function called str, which is going to turn something into a string. Okay, so str char is going to turn char, this variable, into string. Or if you really want to, like, you know, again, like, because we got the data here, we turned it to a char, we turned it to an integer, right? So now if I actually bring this back here and put this right here, this should work. Actually, let's actually not do that. Let's give it a variable. We're gonna say char final equals, and there you go. So obviously we need to turn this into a new variable, right? So we can refer to it in this print function. So I'm just gonna copy this, put it right here, and if I do this, this should technically work, right? Because let's say Sean, and there you go, your name has 4 characters. Just like that, we solved this problem. And the way we did this is that we turned this integer that we got here into a string. All right, and by the way, you can actually really mix this together. You don't have to actually have a whole new thing for it, a whole new variable for it. You can actually do this. So there you go. So yeah, just put it in the opposite side. So again, you can put the string out and then, like, you know, length function and then the name. Obviously, just make sure you get that right. But yeah, so that's that. So this is essentially our, you know, the way we actually convert stuff. So there are different ways. Again, there are different functions, by the way. So we use the string, right? But there is also another one called well, we use the string, but there is another one called float. So we actually turn something into a float, or actually integer. So like we can turn a number into an integer. For example, the way this integer comes to play is that let's actually build something cool with it. So we can say, let's actually turn something, let's for example add something, two things to each other. For example, first one is the first number. This is a variable. Again, we're using variables. We're gonna say input, please enter your first number. So just like that, we ask for like the first number they want to add, right? So keep in mind, when we receive this information, it's going to be a string, right? So that's the problem. It's going to be a string. It's going to be text. So let's add, and let's ask for a second one. Second number equals input, please enter your second number. So now we got all this information, right? So now what we're going to do, we're going to turn these two into a integer. So that's very important. Or a float, either one of those, doesn't matter. But in this case, because we're asking for whole numbers, we want to just work with integers, all right? So I'm going to say first equals, so we're going to turn this input, the first number, into an integer. So we're going to say integer equal plus this. There you go. And second equals integer, and we're gonna put the second number in there. So the idea is that we're gonna get these numbers, turn them into an actual number, because this is string when we receive it, and then we're gonna add them to each other, right? So we're gonna say print equals, or like open parentheses open, first plus second, or yeah. So there you go, just like that. We're gonna say we're gonna add these to each other, and we're gonna get our results. All right, so now if I run this code, it's gonna ask us for the first number. Let's say we're gonna put 20, and second one 40. It's gonna give us 60. So just like that, guys, we got these information, and then we just turned it into an integer, and we added them to each other. Very simple. So guys, see, this is how you actually turn you know, integers into floats and stuff like that. So make sure you put these characters to use. Again, it starts with an int for integer conversion, right? A float for the float conversion, a boolean or bool for boolean conversion, okay? And it's gonna be a string, str, for a string conversion. So like, these are very important stuff. Make sure you remember you're gonna be using them a lot all over your code. All right, guys? Thank you so much. Let me know if you have any questions, guys, about this. The conversion is very, very important. Make sure you practice it, because next lesson is very important. I'm going to have a very hard practice lesson for you, because I want to make sure that you understand this fully before you move on to the next lesson, because I want to make sure you understand data types fully, how to convert them, and also we're going to talk about also another subject that we talked about, which is subscripting. So that's very important as well, which we'll get to that stuff. All right, guys, let me know if you have any questions. If not, I'll see you in next practice.